they're from, but I'm always curious if everybody could put into the text chat room where they're calling in from. So if you're in North America, maybe the city, the state, or province that you're calling in from. If you're from outside the United States, maybe the city and country that you're calling in from. It's always kind of fun to see. I, by the way, am calling in from a little town called Newmarket, New Hampshire, which is north of Boston. So that's where I'm calling from. And I see, let's see, we got Tim from Ramsey, New Jersey, and Cheryl from Eugene, Oregon, Christine from San Diego. Let's see. David's from Cambridge, Maryland, so obviously David pretty close to where I'm at. Brian from Los Angeles, thanks. Deborah from Washington, D.C. Coming a little faster than I can read. Susan from Portland, Oregon. Neil from Montvale, New Jersey. Marilyn from Richmond, Virginia. Dustin from Indianapolis, Indiana. Anybody else willing to weigh in and kind of let us know where you're calling in from? It's always kind of fun. It's always fun to see where people are calling in from. My second question for you, since I've been chatting for a little bit here, how is the volume? Is it too loud? Too soft? Is it okay? Is there static on the line? Let me know if good. Audio is fine. It's fine. Great. I just wanted to make sure. Good. If for some reason something happens with the sound, please let me know, and I'll try to correct it. I'm fairly good at reading the chat room while I'm presenting. Not necessarily perfect, but fairly good. So if you have questions or comments as we go along, please feel free to put that in the text chat room, and I'll see it. If you feel like maybe I haven't seen it, I won't mind at all if you go ahead and put it in a couple of times. That way you'll make sure that I see it and respond to it. The webinar that we're going to do today, of course, is all about social learning. And so we're going to spend our time talking about that area of learning that's relatively new, as probably most people know. We're going to investigate that just a little bit and see what we might be able to do with social learning. I'm going to start out with a couple of polls. Since it is a relatively new area, I'm going to start out with a pretty simple one. I'm going to let you vote. Do you currently use social learning? Pretty simple, either yes or no. And I'll try to share the results afterwards. So if you'd go ahead and put in there, okay, Deborah put in the chat room. You can also vote right there by clicking on the button, either yes or no, the radio button. But Deborah put in there no. What about everybody else? Using social learning, yes or no? And I'll give that just a couple of seconds. I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. But I want everybody an opportunity to participate if they would like to. Looks like we've got 19, actually 20 counting Deborah's, out of the 23 that are in there right now. So let me go ahead and close that up. And you probably can see the results. 42% say yes, they are currently using social learning. And the remaining 58% of the 19 who voted say no, they are not using. Now, if you are part of that group that are using social learning, or if you're part of a group that would like to start using social learning, I'd like to know what social media tools are you using or do you intend to use for social learning. The choices that I gave were LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. If you mark others, which a couple of people have already marked others, do me a favor and put in the text chat room what other tools you're intending to use for social learning or you currently are using for social learning. So for the 5 that said others, if you would, put in the text room what you're using. Okay, Christine's using SharePoint. Very good. Oh, how about that? Cleon's using Yammer. Very good. Marilyn, TED Talks, and I'm assuming, Marilyn, that TED Talks is part of the LMS known as TEDS. Neil's using Yammer. Elisa's using SharePoint. Yeah, Susan, you know what? That's my fault. Susan made a point that you can only select one, and that's my fault. I didn't even think about that when I set up the poll. I should have made it so that you could use multiple choices. Okay. Deborah's using SharePoint. Dustin's using various LMSs such as Blackboard. So great. Let me go ahead and close that so you can see the results. 27% are using LinkedIn. No one's using Facebook. That's very interesting. 20% are using YouTube, which I predict over time will become even more and more utilized. We'll talk about that a little bit later. No one is using Twitter. And then you can see 53% are using other platforms, which you can see in the text chat room. Okay, one more, and then we'll get moving on. Let me go ahead and use this. Would you go ahead and rate your experience with social learning? It's been very beneficial. It's been somewhat beneficial. Hasn't been beneficial at all, and we still do not know. So if you go ahead and answer that, certainly be interesting to find out what your experience is so far with social learning. So could you rate your experience so far? Looks like 9 people have answered. There we go. We got 10 now. I don't know that we're going to get much more. But certainly the overwhelming right now, I'm going to go ahead and close this up. 11 people voted on this, and that's probably not too surprising. 18%, which happens to be 2, said it's been beneficial. Have been very beneficial. 2 have said it's been somewhat beneficial. It's been beneficial. And the vast majority, 64% or 7 people, said they still don't know whether it's beneficial or not. That doesn't surprise me. Social learning is so relatively new that it doesn't surprise me that we don't know yet how beneficial it's going to be. Okay, so back to the material at hand, social learning. Now we've titled this the New Age Learning Paradigm. However, I think what's new about it is what we're using. What is social learning? You see the definition there given from Albert. But social learning, in my opinion, is that human interaction that happens that causes a person to learn something from somebody else. By that definition, classroom-based training is social learning. Or this webinar, provided that you'll learn something from me, is social learning. And in fact, in my opinion, social learning has been going on for the existence of learning. Go all the way back to the cavemen, and someone had to teach somebody how to build a fire. And since it was 2 people interacting together, in my opinion, that was social learning. So what's different about what we're going to talk about today? Well, what's different we're talking about today is that it is becoming increasingly difficult, or maybe increasingly unlikely, that 2 people are going to be able to get together in the same time and space. It's even becoming more and more difficult for people to get together in a webinar because of the time constraints that everybody has on their schedules. And it is very unlikely anymore that people are going to be co-located in the same area. So we go back to these social interactions, this social learning. How does it contribute to learning? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. You see the list there. But we're able to discuss things back and forth. Although I'm able to discuss on this webinar verbally, you're able to discuss through the text chat room. But we're able to discuss things and explore opportunities together. And from that, you'll be able to learn new perspectives. For instance, maybe one new perspective that you might have gained today is social learning is not new. It's the tools that we're currently using that is new, not social learning in itself. We'll be able to share new concepts and new ideas. I hope to explore along the way today some new things that can be done using the tools that maybe you'll want to adapt. And of course, we're spreading the knowledge from person to person. We're able to collaborate on projects and opportunities and our work in general. And of course, we can build a network. The nice thing about the tools that we are currently starting to use, the social media tools, if you will, that we're using for social learning, like LinkedIn, and although no one's using Facebook, Facebook is another one, particularly in those, is I can build an ever-increasing network, and from that network, be able to gain a tremendous amount of information. more than I ever could before. Years ago, I worked in an office, and although the office had 130 people, I was primarily limited to the networking with that 130. And since we were spread across 3 floors, I was really probably more likely to network with the people that were on the floor that my office was on, and therefore 40 people. Contrast that to LinkedIn. I currently am well over 10,000 people who I'm connected to on LinkedIn. And so I have this huge network. Recently being first part of November 2014, I had an issue, and I thought I had the idea of what I needed to do to solve the issue that I was faced with, but I put it out to those 10,000. Now, did all 10,000 participate in response? Of course not. But I did have about 190 folks who weighed in and gave me an interesting perspective, and in fact changed my viewpoint on what I should do and how I should move forward. When you think about the fact that I could, with one click, reach over 10,000 individuals and get 190 perspectives, with something that literally could never have been done before, ever, in the history of learning. So it's a great way to network, a great way to collaborate, spread knowledge, learn new concepts and ideas, get different perspectives, and of course, just simply discuss ideas. So we don't confuse them. There's really 2 parts of learning that we want to look at, social and experiential. Now, I'm going to look at it from one simple perspective. I'm about ready to take a trip. I'm going to go to New York City. And I really am going to take a trip and go to New York City for a weekend with my family. So one is I can kind of just take a gamble, select a hotel, hope for the best, and go and through experience learn whether or not that was the kind of hotel that I wanted to stay at. So I can learn by experiencing it myself. What I actually did, though, was much different. One is I looked at the hotels and looked at the ratings, and great travel tools like Travelocity and others, Expedia, but I tend to use Travelocity, gives me good ratings and gives me the comments that I can explore of people who have actually been there. Social learning. And then I went on from that, and I started to ask people that I knew that had been to New York City, who traveled, if they had had any experience with the hotels that I was considering. And from that, I was able to make a more educated decision on what hotel I wanted to try. Social learning. I learned through interaction with others, and in this case, I used the rating system on Travelocity, and I used, again, LinkedIn as a way to explore further to determine where I wanted to stay and whether or not that was the kind of hotel I want. Social learning. Much bigger, much broader, I think much better, and certainly allows me to get a different perspective. Now, does that mean that it guarantees that when I go to New York City that the hotel I stay at will be perfect or will meet my needs exactly? Well, no, of course not. My experience might be different than the other people who stayed there. Sometimes that's just the luck of the draw. Sometimes it's because my expectations are out of line. But it gives me a better chance of going and finding the kind of experience that I wanted. So here are some facts about social learning as of, actually 2014. You can see this results came from the eLearning Guild, certainly a very respected organization in the e-learning field. Says that right now, going worldwide, between 20 and 30% of organizations are using social media tools for learning. So 20 to 30% are involved. Now, if you look at the poll that I took today, we're much higher. This group is much higher than that particular percentage. Though recognize a vast majority of the people that are on today are on from North America, and I think our experience in North America may be different than the rest of the world. I think at this point we're more actively involved in social media tools possibly than some parts of the world. And look at that next number, 76%, 3/4 of all organizations that participated in the eLearning Guild survey say that they intend to explore social learning. So to say that social learning is about ready to explode would be an understatement. It is certainly the trend of the near future. Now, interesting that in our poll today, no one, 0 people said that they use Twitter. And yet, from this particular survey, it became number 1 of the top 10 tools for learning in 2014. I think what's happened, this particular result was done in early 2014. I think what's happened is there have been many other tools that have been originated and started to be used that have surpassed Twitter. And I think Twitter is rapidly starting to fall off the map as a learning tool. And I think the primary reason is the constraint on the number of characters. It's very, very tough to get a full message across, of course, delivered through Twitter. But however, Twitter is certainly a tool that was rapidly being used. As I kind of already mentioned, social media is not social learning. Social media, of course, are the tools. Social learning is what happens with those tools. And so we leverage the social media tools for the social learning. And social learning can encompass many other aspects. And overall, it leads to informal training. Now, we're throwing out another term. What is informal training? Well, informal training is something that cannot be easily measured. Formal training, i.e. classroom, we can do a quiz and determine what has been learned and what has been gained. We can look at the curriculum, look at the outline, look at the slides. Same thing with a webinar, and we can actually measure what information was given out. Informal learning, not so easy to do. You can't easily measure what has been gained. And so we refer to that oftentimes as informal learning, and certainly social learning causes informal learning to happen. There are benefits to social learning, both for the individual and as well for the organization. Let's look at the individual. One, allows you to network with colleagues. Sometimes that's networking with people who have similar backgrounds, similar interests than you, and sometimes the advantage is it allows you to network with people who have quite varied backgrounds and whose experiences are quite different than yours. You look at the 10,000 people that are in my LinkedIn connections, and you'll find that there is a wide variety of people there, some of which have a very similar background to mine. My background is primarily training, e-learning, mobile learning, classroom-based training, webinars, etc. But a lot of the connections that I have don't have a big experience with training, are business owners. Of course, it allows you to brainstorm. And it allows you to brainstorm in a completely different way than ever before. Again, I go back to that past life of mine when I was in an office with about 140 individuals in the building. We would brainstorm. We would try to get 4 or 5 people together in a conference room and try to brainstorm and think through a process. Unfortunately, we are all having the same experiences, working on the same sort of projects, working for the same company, living in the same exact town. It limited the amount of brainstorming, though certainly very beneficial. Contrast that to what I did back in November, and I was brainstorming with, started out with 10,000, although as I said, not all 10,000 participated, but I certainly was brainstorming with 190 people. And a lot of those people, I would go back with them after they sent their suggestions, ideas, and explore it deeper. And gained a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience that I would have never gained anyplace else. So a great way to brainstorm, and of course right along with that, trade information back and forth. And that example in November, I was the recipient for the most part of information. However, I am also very active in LinkedIn in trying to share information to others. and to collaborate and bring together ideas and concepts. And then, as I experienced in November, it's a great opportunity for just-in-time solutions to issues. I had an issue that was facing me within the next few weeks, and I needed to come up with a formulated plan, a set of actions that I wanted to take to solve or to work with that issue. And in a matter of literally days, I got all that information, got what I needed, was able to go back and explore explore deeper with each person, and I was able to formulate an answer and how I was going to address that issue, which, by the way, worked wonderfully well. And I got that done in literally a matter of days. It didn't take weeks or months. I had everything formulated in a matter of days. But there's also benefits to the organization, and you see three of them here. Collaboration between employees, which, by the way, used to happen all the time, regularly, going back to my days of working in the office with 140 people. There was a tremendous amount of collaboration going on, sometimes at the coffee pot, sometimes in casual conversation, sometimes because a handful of employees would go and have lunch together. Sometimes it would be more formal, and they would have a brainstorming session or a meeting, get together in a conference room or whatever. But over the last 10, 15 years, collaboration between individuals in an office has rapidly decreased, due primarily to so much travel, people away from the office. I know a lot of people that have an office, but very seldom ever visit their office because they're traveling so much, going from office to office or location to location, or because people are working at a much ever-increasing rate working from their homes, so they're remote employees. And because so many times now businesses, to try to keep up with the market, have multiple satellite offices that are small. So going back to my experience with 140, that organization, which still exists and still works, no longer has that one big central office. Now those people are co-located with their customers and near their customers, and so they have multiple small offices of 5 to maybe 7 people, and so the amount of collaboration without using some kind of social media tool has decreased rapidly. And it stands to reason, the next one, that we're able to share knowledge and retain knowledge much, much more easily now, given that same experience. Again, before, when everybody was co-located in an office, it was relatively easy to share knowledge and to retain that knowledge. Then, with everybody traveling, moving, and working from home, there was a period of time where it became very, very difficult. Social media tools now are causing that to happen again at an ever-increasing rate. And then, of course, right along with that, we can grow our staff. I don't know how you guys grew in your business area, but I can tell you that the way I grew in my area of expertise and learning was by association with others. So by association with very talented trainers, I could learn from their experiences, watch what they were doing, and hone my skills. And over time, that's how I increased in my capabilities, is by working with others, some that were more experienced, and I could give you a zillion stories where I learned from people who were new, but came at the idea from a very different perspective, and I was able to gain knowledge and skills and expertise. Again, that has started to go away because of the lack of association of people together. Pretty hard to do that if you're working out of your home office, isolated all by yourself. With social media tools, organizations are starting to see that happening more and more and more. Consequently, we go back to the numbers that we saw today. More and more organizations are utilizing the social media tools to cause social learning to happen, to gain back the lost ground that happened by disassociation. So, social media is wonderful. You hear that from my discussion, and I'm assuming that because you're here, you've already started to experience that, or you're thinking of experiencing that, and you are interested in going down the journey of social learning, using social media for learning. Is it a one-size-fits-all? No, absolutely not. And that becomes the problem. It is very, very difficult for me as company A to look at what company B is doing and just replicate what they're doing and hope for the best. It ends up being something that's very unique to your company, to your culture, to your customers, to your particular environment. Some people find that things like LinkedIn are exactly the right way to go. Others find that YouTube is much, much more effective for what they're doing. Others find that just straight discussion boards or collaboration events or webinars, etc., etc. So first, you got to recognize it is not something that will just that you can look at a company and see what they're doing and then just duplicate that and you will have wild success. So some of the tools that I find that people use is Facebook. Now, interesting, out of the group that's here, no one said they used Facebook. And yet I find that a lot of companies are using Facebook as an outstanding way to collaborate together. By building closed groups, they can share knowledge, share information back and forth, they can hold discussions, and they can have their own little working group. Even though that working group may transcend across the globe, they are able to work together and to accomplish great things. A training consulting company that I know that does a lot of technical training literally has offices spread throughout the world, and they use closed groups and Facebook as a way to collaborate on new projects. So they may be using e-learning developers that work in their office in India, or some of the developers that work in the United Kingdom, and maybe the project manager might be in Asia, and maybe some of the staff is near close by the customer. Let's say that customer is in the United States. By using closed groups, those folks can collaborate together and build and learn and create their project very effectively, even though they're obviously separated by tremendous amounts of difference in time. Twitter, again, interestingly enough, no one is in this group is using Twitter, but it is a great way to do things like updates, send information, small bits of information back and forth. This particular slide says hold discussions. Boy, it's going to have to be a very short discussion, or it's going to have to be a tremendous amount of individual pieces because of the character limitation. But Twitter can be a very, very effective tool, particularly for sending out instant updates. Going back to this company that I was talking about, this technical training company, they use Twitter very effectively if they've got to get information out, small amounts of information out very, very rapidly. So they're working on a project, they run into a snag, or they find something that works particularly well. They tend to use Twitter, capture everybody that's in that working group spread across the globe, get the information, burst out right away, and those people that are affected get that information very quickly. Now, as I kind of mentioned, I personally think that YouTube is a learning tool that is yet to come into its space. I think YouTube is going to continue to be an outstanding tool for both marketing, social marketing, as well as for social learning. The nice thing that's kind of happened with YouTube is our standards, ours being ours collectively as human beings across the globe, our standards for video media have decreased to something that's more worthwhile. It had only been just a short few years ago, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago, people would have got very upset if I built a video using a handheld recording device, whether that's a handheld video camera or my cell phone, built a video that showed how to do something and then posted it on YouTube. People or posted it for people to see. people got real upset. It just wasn't an accepted practice that we had to have a certain level of quality of video, of the recording, of the lighting, of the audio, etc., before it would be accepted. YouTube has certainly changed that all by itself, and that now it is certainly more valuable for the content than necessarily for the production. Now, I'm not saying that therefore you can go out and build a bunch of really, really crappy videos with extremely bad lighting and extremely poor audio to the point where you can hardly understand what's being conveyed. Of course not. I mean, training is training nevertheless, but in fact, we are seeing relatively unsophisticated videos being created and delivered on YouTube and being very, very effective. In my opinion, and this is simply just my opinion, YouTube has taken the place of, to a large degree, OJT, on-the-job training. And you know, on-the-job training never was very sophisticated either compared to classroom-based training. You might have a person, let's take a trade, for example. So you have an electrician that wants to teach a new electrician how to do a lockout, tagout before they go to work on equipment, make sure that it's de-energized. Well, formerly in the classroom, that was probably done by a very professional trainer, very sophisticated with great graphics and pictures and slides and so on and so forth, as it should be. And today that would probably be done in e-learning or in a webinar. Then we'd get to the structured on-the-job training, or maybe not structured, maybe just on-the-job training. And the senior electrician would not necessarily be so smooth in the way that he or she presented it. It would be a lot more down and dirty. The lighting would likely not be really great because we're out on the floor someplace working with the real equipment. Certainly the environment would not be so great. The air conditioning is not so good if existing at all, etc., etc. But the point is, we wanted to transfer the knowledge from that senior electrician to the new electrician, and done in such a way that the new electrician got the information needed and got the skill that's needed. YouTube, to a large degree, is taking over that realm of structured on-the-job training. So you can imagine that in a world where I have a senior electrician that is in Asia and a junior electrician that is in Washington, D.C., you can certainly see where maybe that senior electrician would do a YouTube video out on the plant floor demonstrating how to do a lockout tagout that new electrician back in D.C. would be able to view, and from that be able to go do the task. YouTube, in my opinion, over the next few years will be used for learning more and more and more. I personally use LinkedIn a lot. Maybe it's because of where my interests lie or my expertise lie, but I find it a great way to connect with others, professionals, people that are in my area of expertise. We can share experiences and hold discussions and share information back and forth. I find LinkedIn to be quite valuable. And then there's a whole host of other social media tools listed here that over time might prove to be extremely valuable. I think some of those we're still waiting yet to see how they work out. Some other tools, of course, are blogs. What a great way to learn from a true subject matter expertise, or from podcasts or feeds, our RSS feeds, webinars. Again, I'm assuming that this webinar is sharing information that you find at least something valuable. Mind maps, collaborative tools, discussion forums, instant messaging, which I haven't spoken about, but a lot of companies tie groups of people together through instant messaging. So all of the accounting folks are all connected through one instant message group, all of the executive management through another, all of the electricians through another, etc., etc., so that if I want to get a message out very, very quickly to a given group, I can do that, and we can share information. Much like Twitter, we can share information very quickly back and forth. Cleon has a question here. Anybody using MS Communicator? I am not using MS Communicator, and I don't know if it's still around. So let's ask the question, since after all we're doing one on social learning. Let's do a little social learning. Is there anybody out there that's using MS Communicator? And does anybody know, does that tool still exist, or is that tool gone? Now would be your time to put that into the chat room. Now there are some challenges that are posed that right away, particularly management, want to get into. And Christine says they use Link, and I'm not familiar with Link, Christine, so maybe if you can expand on that a little bit. I'm not familiar with that particular tool. But challenges that are posed is, of course, you can see productivity, efficiency, firewall, security, bandwidth, intellectual property, confidential, content, participation, etc., etc., etc. Okay, it's a Microsoft tool. I'm not familiar with Microsoft Link. Is that by chance replaced MS Communicator? There you go. Brian knew the answer. Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, see, now look, social media works, right? So let's talk about these individually. You know, each one of these issues are really the same issues that we've had around forever. Nothing has really changed, but right away people are worried about management, typically management, are worried about things like productivity and efficiency. Well, go back to my experience in the office, 140 people, and I can remember the office manager, who was a vice president at the time, a friend of mine by the name of Dave Thames, used to be concerned all the time about the wasted time at the coffee pot, the wasted time and informal discussions when people would go into another person's office and talk. Management's always been worried about that. The real answer is to just create awareness. I contend that most people are very, very conscientious about their job. And yeah, I may go into someone's office, or in today's world, go into a discussion board, and it's possible that we could spend time talking about hobbies or things that are of interest. But reality, I realize I've got a job to do, and I think most people raise themselves to a level of professionalism where they're going to be very conscious about productivity and efficiency. And sometimes that casual conversation is very needful in helping create the atmosphere to then discuss the problem that's at hand. Firewall, security, and bandwidth issues. Although those are still issues in a lot of companies, in reality, over time, we are solving those problems. Certainly here in the United States, wireless connections are prevalent throughout, not 100%, but certainly very heavily available. And for the most part, those wireless connections have great bandwidth, and so for the most part, I can view and or post the information that I want. Security is always going to be an issue, and the answer to security is the same answer to the first bulleted item, which is make people aware, make people understand what they need to be careful about when they're sharing stuff. Same thing with intellectual property. Just make people aware. Will mistakes happen? Oh yes, of course so. But wasn't that always the case? Wasn't it always a concern that I'd be down at the local coffee house, or today I guess we'd call it Starbucks. Back then maybe it wasn't necessarily so clearly defined, but I'd be somewhere out in public, and if I wasn't careful, I might share information that maybe my buddy Dave Thames, the vice president, wasn't so thrilled that I was sharing. That always would happen. Same thing with confidentiality. You got to train your people in all of these areas so that they know what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, where the lines are, and what they can and cannot share around. And then, of course, the big one that people are concerned about is, how do I get people to participate? Well, truth of the matter is, there are some people who will never participate. And right away we think, oh, that's the codgy old man or old lady that doesn't want to participate. Well, in actuality, we're finding out that there is an interesting phenomena that goes on, that people that are in their 60s and above tend to use social media heavily. Those that are in their 20s and below tend to use social media very heavily. The real sticky point is those that are in their 40s and 50s. And there's some of those that may never use the tools. However, even that group that goes in very hesitantly to not use the tools, once they see the success, once they see that people are getting answers, once they see that there's real value in the tools, they, like everybody else, will start to participate, of course, leaving behind some who just won't. But hasn't that always been the case? Again, I can remember back, I won't mention his last name, but one of the guys that worked in our office, whose first name was Bob, never would participate in casual conversations. You'd never find him at the coffee pot. You'd never find him wandering from office to office. He thought that was a huge waste of time, and he felt that he was better off to go it alone. I, on the other hand, am very social, and so I'm very likely to be the one that's initiating those conversations, both in the office and online, because I find a lot of value in hearing from and through other people. But that'll always be the case. So here's what's happening. Facebook and Facebook-like tools, Twitter feeds, although we're seeing a decrease maybe right now. Repositories of internal knowledge. A number of people mentioned SharePoint. What a great tool, though there's others like that. But what a great tool for storing knowledge and making it available for the entire organization to get to. Instant messaging. Discussion forums, media libraries like YouTube and others are the tools that we're seeing more and more being used throughout corporations as time goes on. Just a couple of examples. A Canadian telecommunications company, I'll leave the names out, saw a 20% savings on training costs just in the first year of shifting to social learning. Of course, that was done very controlled, with a lot of training being done ahead of time to make sure people knew what was expected, what was available, how they could use it, what they might gain, etc. But, for a large telecommunication company in Canada, like one that may cover the entire country, 20% is a tremendous amount of money. And then there was a global IT firm, again, we'll leave the name out, and they found it extremely effective way to connect their sales workforce. And if there's one group that really needs it is when you have disconnected sales force, as often happens because those folks are on the road all the time. They tend to get isolated, and it's very difficult to increase their knowledge, very difficult to get new information out to those folks. And they found social media to be a tremendous tool. By the way, one of the tools that they used extensively was Facebook. Very, very, very valuable to them as a way to communicate to all their sales folks worldwide. All right. So far, I haven't seen a lot, though we've had a couple of questions, and I appreciate those that participated in not only asking the question, but then the answers that we got. But this would be a great time. If you do have questions, if you do have comments, go ahead and put them into the text chat room, and I will do my best to at least start to explore it. And it looks like to me like we've got some of the best minds in the world on this topic on the webinar today. And so together, I'm sure we can come up with answers to whatever questions you might have. While I'm waiting for questions to come in, if you want to get a hold of me, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. There's my phone number. I'm certainly more than willing to share whatever information I've got with you free of charge. So if you got questions, you feel free to call me. You may not get me on the phone. I may have to call you back, but I will do my best to call you back. Or the very best way to communicate with me, of course, is through email. And I guarantee you I will get you an answer back. It may take me a couple of days to find the answer or to be able to validate that what I think is true, but I will get that back to you. Well, I see I got a couple of questions there. I'm going to go ahead and let you know there will be another webinar next month, February 26th, also at 2 o'clock Eastern. We're going to talk about the blended approach, how to blend all the different types of learning that's available to us today, how to blend that, and so that we can come up with the most effective learning process possible. No, Neil asked a question. Does anybody else have an answer to this? Any opinion on the new Facebook at Work product? And I don't have an opinion yet. It's so new that I don't have an opinion at all. I do think that Facebook is seeing a huge lost opportunity that LinkedIn has captured, and I think they're trying to go after that marketplace where LinkedIn has done a great job of being the Facebook-like tool for business. And Cleon asked, do you recommend a social learning policy or guideline for the company? And do I have an example? I don't have an example, and I don't know the size of the company that you're in. If it's a relatively small company, probably you don't need to have a written policy, but you need to have a policy that's communicated. If your company is greater than 500 people, then I would suggest that you probably want to have a written policy and or a guideline. You may not want to call it a policy, but something that you can share to cover those important things. What's confidential, what should be shared and not shared, what kind of language can be used and not used, how do we maintain a level of ethics and morality in our social learning environment. Those sorts of things need to be covered, and then of course they need to be shared with everybody. Too often a company create a guideline like that or policy and then just put it into SharePoint and assume that everybody's going to read it and understand it, where in fact I think there's a great opportunity to not only have that policy, but then to turn around and use the social media tools as a way to cause social learning. So YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook or all those host of different tools that we talked about, using it as a way to communicate those guidelines in policy. Yeah, okay, so Neil goes on to say, yeah, having that policy will solve a big issue, how to keep personal and work separate. Though I think you find in today's world there's a real gray area merging of those two, where work and personal is harder and harder to keep it separate. Any recommendations on social media, doing mobile, particularly with iPad? I think that's part of what you just got to expect. Some people will use social media only on a computer or laptop. I think over time more and more people will use it on a mobile device, whether that's an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device, a tablet or whatever. But I think that you just got to expect that that's going to happen, that it's going to be used mobilely. Okay, boy, Neil, you did a great job answering Cleon's question. Cleon, boy, you grab that right now. We'll leave that there for as long as possible, so that you can grab that information that Neil shared. I think that's excellent, Neil. Great way to start building that social learning policy or guideline. Great. I got to say, I'm thrilled that we've got such a knowledgeable group of people on today that, gee, I didn't have to do much at all. You guys were able to help answer each other's questions, which is what social learning is all about. Okay, we're about 8 minutes from the top of the hour. I always assume that probably everybody has another meeting coming up or something else that they've got to run off to. But let me just stop just for a minute and see if there's any other questions or comments. You see there's the next webinar. Go ahead and sign up for that now. I'll also try to send out information to everybody in an email form so that if you want to sign up for that webinar on how to blend everything together. And when I say blend, we're talking about blending formal classroom training with webinars, with e-learning, with mobile learning, with social learning. How can we blend that all together to come up with the most effective training program? And as you might imagine, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's something that you need to tailor specifically for your organization, and then over time tweak it to make it work for you. Thanks for the nice comments, Cleon. I certainly appreciate your comments. I certainly enjoy doing this, and I hope that they are beneficial. Again, if you need to contact me, that's the way to contact me. Since there have not been any other questions here for the last couple of minutes, I'm going to assume that everything that needed to be discussed was discussed. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thanks for allowing me to share at least what I think I've learned over the years with you, and I hope it's beneficial. Feel free to contact me at any time. I will do my best to give you the best answers that I can get, and most of those answers probably won't come directly from me, but will come from the group of people that I associate with in a way of social learning. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, JR. I certainly appreciate it. Okay, then with that, I will sign off. Wish you all a good day, and I hope that as time goes on, you're able to use social learning more and more effectively. Thanks. Have a good afternoon.